like this. I know Maggie Goodwin has worked with me a lot on some of the federal stuff we've been doing with the ERA committee. Thank you, Maggie. And so I know most of you know that, usually you start it off and say, do you realize women aren't in the Constitution, and show them a copy of the Constitution, the women that were not in there. But I know that you all know that. So just thought we'd do an update on kind of where it is, and it is kind of stalled. There is a deadline on the ERA. So being from Nevada, Senator Spearman is who got things going in Nevada. She's known nationally for her work on the ERA, and Nevada, was the 36th state, and then Illinois, and then Virginia. And so our attorneys general all have a case against the archivist to get the archivist to publish the ERA, because while he published Nevada and he published Illinois, he didn't publish Virginia. And it was because he received what do they call that thing? But Trump had Barr send a memo to the archivist and instructed him not to publish the ERA. So that's why it's stuck in that way. So there's a couple different ways we're working on it. Our attorneys general from Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia all have a case against the archivist. It's been started again. It's at the U.S. Circuit Court for the District of Columbia, filing on November 1st again. It's been the second go round, and it's against David Fierro, Virginia versus Fierro. So that's one piece, is the Attorney General. The Congress has already passed the bill to remove the deadline in Congress. That was done, I believe, in March, wasn't it, Sasha? And then it's stuck in the Senate, of course. And so if we don't remove the filibuster, or we don't have enough votes, it's like everything else. It needs 60 votes to go forward. So that's another part. I checked again, they've only have 4 co-sponsors on the Senate bill right now on SJ Res 1. And it's because they are waiting to get more Republicans kind of do the Noah's Ark 2x2 thing. But I heard that they're going to give that up pretty soon and allow more senators to sign on. So like both of the Nevada senators are would be sponsors if given, the ability to put them on when you look on the website, you see there's only 4. So that leads us to what Sasha was saying. I couldn't really figure it out at first because everybody was all excited, but because the House has already passed the bill to remove the deadline. However, they're holding, says the U.S. House Oversight and Reform Committee is holding a hearing on the Equal Rights Amendment this Thursday. It's going to be really early for me. It's like 6:30 in the morning for the press conference, 7:30 for the committee hearing. But you can watch it on Facebook. I'll put in some links in the chat where you can watch. Both the ERA Coalition and the Feminist Majority are having a press conference at 9 a.m. Eastern time. So that's 6 my time. I set the alarm, and it'll be on their Facebook page for the ERA Coalition and Feminist Majority. And then there's a hearing watch party that you can watch with everybody. So it's because they said the reason it's the last week marked 50 years since Congress passed the ERA in the 70s. So it's historic, and it's the first time there's been a hearing in the full hearing, full committee since then. So it is very historic. So that's the other piece. And then there was one other. So we have the legal actions, we've got the senators, and then President Biden. We know he's got his hands full. And I was just talking to Senator Pat Spearman the other night, and she's kind of advocating not pushing too hard on Biden because he's got the Build Back Better, and he's trying to work with Manchin, but he promised, and so did Vice President Harris, to support the ERA. And so we've done we have some postcards we've been writing to ask them to instruct the archivist to publish. So I think it's kind of a 3-prong approach here to keep attention. So it's probably good they're having the hearing on Thursday to bring it to, I was hoping it was the Senate that was holding it. And so that would be another piece to push for, is to get a Senate hearing. So I had a little list. I want to make sure I've got all of our, and then I can send it to you, Sasha, for actions to take. Let's see. So those, what can you do is ask your senator to endorse SJ Res 1 and remove the deadline. Call for hearings by the Senate subcommittee on the Constitution. Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut is the chair, so that's in your area. Ask Biden and Harris to direct the Department of Justice to discard the Barr memo and instruct the archivist to publish. So those are kind of the key areas that activists can make a difference.
Thank you so much. That's really exciting to hear that there's finally some movement again and opportunity for us to focus on our leaders here in New England, Connecticut. We see you. Do folks have any questions for Jerry or comments?
And I'm putting those links in the chat right now, so if you want to watch on Thursday.
Thank you. All right, so if you come up with some ideas later where you're like, I really want to have a postcard writing party or a phone call writing party or do an event with my community so that folks learn more about the ERA, maybe we watch a movie, email me, let me know, and I'm more than happy to help make that happen and or make our next quarterly coalition meeting a working meeting. Oh, good, Maggie, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could do some postcard writing as on a Zoom. I mean, to get all of the states together, because we have done some, and I don't know, Jerry, has the Office of Legal Counsel, has he been confirmed yet? What's his name, Schroeder?
That was in my notes, and I forgot to mention that his hearing, or he had a hearing, and his confirmation is being held up. And he was the only one in the hearing that somebody mentioned the ERA, and I was trying to, Grassley is the one who asked the ERA question, and he's the one holding up the confirmation. And the Office of Legal Counsel is the one who could possibly get the Attorney General to have a new memo and instruct the archivist. So that was one of the things, Maggie, we were writing postcards to ask about.
Right, and I don't know, because he's the one that would have to get the archivist moving, and the Republicans are really stopping that. So, I mean, Blumenthal, I think he's trying to do whatever he can, but we might send some postcards from all the states to him, or whatever Jerry or the ERA coalition thinks. But I think we just have to keep bugging people and asking to be in the Constitution. I mean, I'm 72 and I don't want to die not being in the Constitution. So.
Yeah, totally. I think that's a great idea. I would love to do a virtual postcard writing party. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Thank you. It's more fun with friends.
Sasha, I'm dropping in the chat too. I'm assuming you're like me, and I always save my chat with all my notes. But Nevada Now webpage, we had kind of put a bunch of ideas for postcard writing, and we have like a sample postcard on there. And feel free to steal and use whatever you want. It's for anybody. So
thank you. We're having a postcard party on Thursday at Mass Now also. So it's just the season. Any other questions or ideas about the ERA before we move on? All right. Well, I'm very excited to hand it over to our special guest, who I know we're all very excited to hear from, Danielle Allen, a mom, social entrepreneur, and nonprofit leader. She has advised presidents, governors, and mayors from around the country on critical policy decisions. She has started and led a range of organizations, from local civic education providers to a global philanthropy. Danielle has worked tirelessly for decades in the policy domains of education, justice, and health, and her leadership is characterized by listening, collaborating, and innovating, as we will be doing today. So thank you so much, Danielle, for joining us. And I'm looking forward to hearing from all of us as we get into conversation together.
Beautiful.
Virtual welcome, everyone, for Danielle.
Thank you so much, Sasha. I appreciate that. And Jerry, thank you for that great update and real clarity about the actions that people can take. It's an honor to be with you and to be a part of the conversation as you're all working hard. So, sorry, my screen has just turned it into focusing on me, which I'm not really interested in seeing myself. So if you don't mind, I'd like to be able to see all of you. Let me just try to fix this real fast. Sorry about that. There we go. That's much better. I do not need to see more of myself. That's for sure. So no, it's an honor to be with you. And I sit here in Massachusetts, of course, and we ratified the ERA in 1972. And of course, our Constitution has constitutional equity. And yet also we have the echo in our heads always of Abigail Adams. And I'm sure you've heard Abigail Adams quoted so often, right? I mean, of course, remember the ladies, but the much, much more important thing she said, my favorite thing she said, was that, when her husband, John, was trying to convince her it would be okay that women aren't in this, she said, basically men have a history of tyranny. And over the history of the world, men have abused their power. And so if, maybe fine, take another chance, but if you can't get it right this time, we women will have to foment for voice and representation. And that phrase of fomenting for voice and representation has always stayed with me and been one of my key motivators. So I am looking forward to the conversation. I am going to take a little bit of time to just tell you a bit more about myself and why I'm running for governor here in Massachusetts. But then I really hope what that will do is tee up the chance for us to talk about the incredibly hard work that we need to get done in Massachusetts. There are issues for women that are relevant on so many different dimensions. And so the ERA is part of the conversation, but there are other pieces to it. And I really would welcome your advice and thoughts about work we should be doing here at the state level. So I have a real sense of urgency about the state of affairs facing our communities and our Commonwealth and our country. And it really is the pandemic that has brought me into this race. I just had such a huge sense of shock when it hit at how easy it seemed that for people to just kind of casually imagine abandoning others. Some of it was the crazy loose talk, like the lieutenant governor of Texas, right? Who said, oh, older people, it's just their time. We don't need to worry about protecting them, keep the economy open. I knew we were a callous society, but the depth of it really shook me. And I had the same reaction to the way we pushed frontline workers back so quickly and aggressively without access to testing and PPE. And we all know what the hit on women was, as women had jobs and had kids who were home from school and really fell out of the workforce at dramatically greater rates than men. And long-term impacts on that for women of that withdrawal from the workforce when the pandemic hit. But in honesty, I can't say that my sense of urgency just started building now. I mean, that was a real serious hit there for me. But, it also goes back to 2016, the morning after the Trump election. I was teaching that fall and I had a 9 a.m. Wednesday morning class. So I was the first grown-up, so to speak, that my college kids were seeing that morning. And I didn't, want to use my usual lecture. I just chucked it and wanted to give them space to share their thoughts and feelings. I didn't ask anybody to stand up in speaking because it was one of those old-fashioned awkward classrooms with fixed seating. But the first young man I called on did stand up, and he looked at me and he said, "You have all just abandoned us." And I was thinking, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. What are you talking about? I wrote my heart out for a year in the Washington Post against the election of Donald Trump. And he continued and he said, "We have just lost the critical years we needed for changing the direction of the existential threat of climate change." And I'm still processing, trying to understand how he meant that was my responsibility. And he concluded by looking at me again and saying, "Your generation has just abandoned our generation by letting the politics of this country get to such a point that the election of Donald Trump was the result." Those words really hit home. And I know so many women felt that way. I was there for Women's March in January 2017, and all around the globe, we were standing up and saying, how did we let this happen? How did these generations of voters lead us to this place? But even there, in all honesty, was not where my sense of urgency started building. That at a personal level goes back to 2009. That's the year I lost my baby cousin, Michael, my younger cousin. Michael was probably the first baby I ever held when he was born in 1979. I was being bullied in school that year, and I was a lonely kid. And here was a built-in best friend who just arrived thanks to my aunt. And he was beautiful and cuddly and huge smile and lit up the room. A curious kid full of a desire to learn French and travel the world and things like that. And then in 1995, when he was 15 and I was just a few years out of college, he was arrested on a first arrest in Southern California for an attempted carjacking. And he served 12 years on that first arrest. And during that time, for years, I went with my aunt to go visit him. And you'd go to visit, and there'd be lines and lines of women, mostly women of color, but not just women of color, white women as well, lines and lines of women making this incredibly long trek, 3-hour drive, super early in the morning, every week to go see somebody who's in prison. And just the sort of devastation to communities and families was so powerful and present for me in that experience. And then when Michael was released, I was what I always call cousin on duty. I was trying to help with housing and school and jobs. And I'll never forget sitting with Michael in a hot car weeks after his release, just looking at a map, trying to figure out how to put the pieces together. The only job that would consider him was in one place and miles away in another direction. The only place with access to a community college program with a path forward, and miles away in a third direction, the only place with access to affordable housing and transportation in between, public transit, slow and unreliable. I had that feeling of dread in my bones that you have when you're just thinking, I do not know how these pieces are going to come together. And for Michael, in the end, they didn't come together. He was killed 2 years after he was first released by somebody he had met in prison, an intimate relationship, so a case of domestic violence, in fact. And so sexual violence is another huge phenomenon in our world. Again, it has destroyed so many families. And it's so important also to see the many different ways in which those experiences manifest and come together across different categories of experience and background. So that moment when we lost Michael was my life's turning point moment. And I had a deep sense of personal failure about his death, but it was also a real moment for digging in and asking the question of why is it we are doing such a bad job as a society of helping so many young people make the transition to a healthy adulthood. And this is true for young people of all backgrounds, all kinds of experiences, all kinds of sexual and gender identities, especially true for young men of color. But we are failing so many young people in so many profound ways. And as I thought about Michael, what that led me to do was to jump into justice reform. I became an advocate for cannabis legalization. As I did that work, I came to believe, and then this is where Abigail Adams came back to me, all right? I came to believe we could not get important things done without a healthier democracy, without, again, in her words, full voice and representation for everybody. So I dug into democracy reform. I've been an advocate for ranked choice voting, for example, over recent years, and an advocate for other reforms, including at the level of constitutional amendments. So it's really a pleasure to, again, to be part of a community that understands the importance of full voice and representation and making that real finally after so long, so many, many years, so many generations of people pursuing that vision and understanding what empowerment means for communities, gives people the chance to build healthy relationships and healthy families and healthy networks of neighbors. And then doing all that work in the middle of that is when the pandemic hit. And as I said, I had that sense of shock when it hit. And so I did what I do. I jumped in and drew on my 20 years of experience leading organizations at all scales and pulled together a big network of experts and practitioners and mayors and community advocates. Together, we put together the first national policy roadmap advocating for a real ramp up of public investment in testing and contact tracing. We got legislation into federal legislation, and ultimately, President Biden signed one of our policies into existence via executive order in his first few days in office. But as I did that work, I just kept staring at the stark disparities of impact. The contrast between, honestly, folks like me in the knowledge sector who could roll up the drawbridge and telecommute, and then the way the bottom just fell out from under for so many others, especially people in the services sector, care workers, right? We all saw that in such a powerful way. And those disparities aren't new. They've been building for a really long time. But what became clear to me doing the COVID work is that this is the moment for transformation. And the second thing that became clear to me is that the transformation that we need is about basic building blocks that really are a state level responsibility: housing and transportation, schools, good jobs, and justice. And we do need the federal government as a partner, but at the end of the day, we need strategic, energetic leadership at the state level on those building blocks to deliver health equity, for example, to ensure that we can build a renewable energy economy and transition to climate justice and sustainability. At the end of the day, housing is an anchor for so much that matters in the lives of women, from supporting children to being able to hold down a job because housing is stable, to having access to a community that's healthy, where you can feel confidence in the safety of your environment. So at the end of the day, again, these building blocks require state level work. So that's where I come to you. And I'd love to put these conversations together and to think about the work you're doing for the ERA. And again, what's the work we need to do at the state level to achieve pay equity, to achieve gender equity in access to health resources, to achieve safety and protections for care workers, and ensure that those jobs are good jobs with a good, strong ladder of opportunity. Much more to be said. I'll stop here for now, but I'm just really grateful to be part of the conversation with all of you. I appreciate the impressive work, incredible, important work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to open the floor up to general questions and reactions.
Hi, Sasha. If I can jump in, I just really want to express my gratitude to Dr. Allen for jumping in. It's incredibly courageous what you're doing, and I know you've been on the national front lines. You know, you're somebody who's well known, but taking on such a personal journey at the same time that you're publicly doing this is incredibly brave. Women have been facing a lot of sad harassment as local political elected officials. I was one, and I've just seen how difficult it is to manage. And so as a woman, I am so excited that you are coming from academia to do something so critical. And so I just really want to express my gratitude for that.
Thank you so much, Zaina. I truly appreciate it. Please feel free to call me Danielle. I would welcome that.
I appreciate it.
And thank you to you for your service. I think in my own experience, it's the example of other women that has given me the courage to step up. So thank you for carving a pathway on that. What role did you hold? I would love to know.
I was on school committee during the pandemic. And so after the awful experience, I decided to step back and focus more on personal stuff. So
yeah, you're not alone. Yeah. I know others too. I mean, I spent a lot of time with the Cambridge Schools Committee. I did a lot of work to try to help out. And, you know, so I was in those meetings. They were really hard. They were really rough. And then there was everything else happening outside of the meetings as well.
Yeah. Yes. And so I'm excited to support you. So thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much, Zaina. Really appreciate it. It's true that, you know, that's one of the goals this year in Massachusetts 2022 is to elect for the first time a woman as governor of the state of Massachusetts, first time in our history. So although we passed the ERA in 1972, and although we have constitutional equity, we've not achieved that yet. It is time. And the good news is I can also bring some national updates. Emily's List and the Democratic Governors Association have both identified Massachusetts as their top target gubernatorial election for November 2022. So we will have friends around the country paying attention and trying to help us, you know, knock over Goliath here. That's the goal. And really, we'll get a woman elected in the corner office one way or another. That's the plan. So.
That is the best news I've heard all day, Danielle. Wow.
Yeah. Five pebbles, a slingshot, and righteousness. That's what we need on our side. So.
Totally. Yeah, Massachusetts really is a phenomenon with such a Democrat. I mean, I think it really shows the holes in our democracy and the Democrats, perhaps specifically, that we can have such a dichotomy of Democratic majority and yet a very popular Republican governor who gets away with not doing so much.
Well, and also, you know, gets away with vetoing the Roe Act and still getting credit as a moderate, right? Gets credit as a moderate, but he vetoes the Roe Act, vetoes the Next Generation Climate Bill, and so forth. So, you know, he knows the legislature is going to override him. And because the legislature overrides him, he gets credit as a moderate, but it's not credit he deserves, you know?
Yeah, and Handmaid's Tale was set in Cambridge for a reason.
Right. Yeah.
Maggie, I see your
Truth.
Yes, I lived in Massachusetts for 30 years, and we did have Jane Swift
Yep,
for
exactly.
a period of time. I don't think she was ever elected.
She was not ever elected. Yeah, hence the
Right.
phrase "first time to elect a woman as governor."
Right.
Exactly. She was.
Well,
she replaced.
I'm hoping that you have some contacts, and we can maybe facilitate some in Connecticut to get support
Thank you.
for you as well as Emily's list. But you know, I think it definitely hurts my soul that Massachusetts has a Republican governor and a white male.
We could be setting a leadership standard in the country for how to tackle a lot of the issues around gender equity. But we have to have a change of leadership in order to achieve that. So my colleague Amanda Cox is on. I'll ask her to put our contact info in the chat, and we would be very grateful to hear from you. And you know, I will put my cell phone in as well, and you know, would love to have any questions or advice or feedback that you might send my way. And Amanda will put the other official details in as well.
That's great. We've heard great things about you, so I look forward to rallying some support from the other side of the border.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Great.
Natasha, were you going to jump in? Or were you just excited?
I was just agreeing with you about the Handmaid's Tale being set in Cambridge for a reason.
Right.
And I mean, I read that in high school, and I felt that way. So, and I'm 38 now, so that's a big age gap.
For sure. Yeah.
Jerry.
So I'm jumping in even though I'm not from Massachusetts, and I just am excited. I looked you up on Twitter so I could follow you, Danielle.
Oh, thank you.
So, you know, one of the things I've noticed that Nevada had the first female majority legislature, and we passed a lot of really great bills. And we have a governor who's a Democrat, but a white man. And he's going to have a lot of competition from some of the craziest people. You just have to see it for yourself.
Right.
One of the things when I heard, is it Sienna, that was talking about the school board in Nevada and around the country, we're seeing from the school board up, just, you know, people going to these meetings, city council meetings, county commission meetings in Nevada and all over. And I just wondered how that is affecting Massachusetts. What I've been telling people, I went to a school board meeting with my N95 mask and my double vaccine, because these people are not wearing masks and they're not enforcing it, even though we have a mask mandate. It just, how is that affecting it in Massachusetts? It's really affecting us. And I think my worry is people are not taking these people seriously. Like, they're making fun of them, and it's horrific. And they're going to get out and vote. And I just wondered how that was, you know, we're worried. We've got a lot of really great Democrats here in Nevada, but there's going to be a lot of competition.
Right. We have the same phenomenon here for sure. And Zaina, you should unmute and just share your perspective and experiences.
So it really did have to do with the pandemic. We had extremes on one end asking us to go fully remote, and the other extreme going all out without masks or anything. And so it was really being in between crosshairs of a few people, especially some of the more vicious people who it became a personal thing. I had to have, shockingly, a restraining order against a neighbor because it became like a physical, personal relationship of aggression. And so you really couldn't please anyone. And there was the quiet middle that, you know, was grateful for the work, but for many people, you just couldn't make the right decision.
Yeah.
That was the trauma of it.
The Department of Justice has been doing some interesting things recently. It's sort of recognized that we have a very serious problem on our hands that, you know, ultimately it doesn't need a fancier name than bullying, you know, like it's grownups bullying and intimidating each other. And of course, obviously they learned it, right? They were licensed to do it by our most recent president. But we have to block that. We have to change that dynamic. And so the Department of Justice has started working with municipalities to give people the tools to understand how to get that bullying and harassment and intimidation back under control. And I think that's honestly the most hopeful thing I've seen on this front lately. And I'm hoping to learn more and build on that, but we all need it so that we can function again. And Zaina, that's just a terrible, terrible story. And I'm so sorry. And clearly your town has now, doesn't have you as a public servant when it should, when it should. So thank you for sharing that, Zaina, and Jerry, for that really important question.
Yeah, I also think that that comes up a lot in talking about sex ed in Massachusetts. For over 10 years, we've been trying
That's
to
a good
pass
example.
the Youth Act, and reports say that like 70% of Massachusetts voters support schools teaching sex ed, and we have school districts that have, like, I was just talking to Worcester today, which is implementing Worcester school system approved sex ed curriculum, and it went through all of these different processes, and there's still parents and the Mass Family Institute trying to stop the curriculum from being taught. And yet Worcester is like the perfect example of central Massachusetts. If you can do it in Worcester, then we can definitely finally do it in the rest of the state. And our health ed frameworks have not been updated since I was born, 1990. And so there's definitely, the school committee, I think, is a really important place to look for where the organized conservative movement is infiltrating and taking over the education of our youth. What if we could raise a generation of young people that knew what consent was and was learning consent, and violence and domestic violence rates would decrease? All this is possible, but not actually happening here in Massachusetts as much as we think.
I think one of the, I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead, Maggie.
No, I know our now president, Cindy, is running for re-election as school board in Milford, which is near New Haven. And the same phenomena, even in Connecticut, you're seeing critical race theory and all of these things really having to, and it's been a little discouraging helping campaign for her, of the things that you hear that people actually seem to believe. And I'm concerned that there. And I think in the schools, and the other thing that I'm sure you're aware of, but the school to prison pipeline, having security officers in the schools and no social workers or other folks, the criminalizing of adolescent behavior, and those issues. Here in Connecticut, the Republicans they don't have a majority, but they really want to crack down on juvenile crime. And there aren't many creative solutions to that apparently means things that don't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of work to do there. I mean, we have a problem with school resource officers in Massachusetts too. So I'm an advocate of taking them out of schools and building health resources in schools. And I really like Sasha's point about education. I think that's connected to having a stronger health team in schools in the first place. And then you can bring more public health resources around education and preventative approaches, including things like violence interruption and in addition to sexual health and substance use disorder and the like. So I do think that's a really critical thing to focus on, and it would be great to think about regional collaborations that would help us on that. Yeah. I think it's terrific too, this conversation. Lots of really great ideas are coming out together. I think to put our finger on the schools committee issue, you're right. And it is, Sasha, as you said, it's highly organized, highly organized. And we have not fully kind of come to grips with the structure of that organization and its consequences, but that is certainly the situation.
I was just going to pipe up and say, I know the FBI is actually looking into it, but a friend of mine is the president of school board trustees here in Nevada, in the Clark County, and her life, like Xenia, her members of her family in a different state altogether are getting threats, and she's got,
Right.
had to get security. But what they're finding is these are people that maybe don't live in Nevada. A lot of the QAnon or those type of groups are helping everyone around the country. I don't care if it's a small town in Utah to LA, to have that same message and go to these school board meetings and county commission meetings and just disrupt. Ours was about mask mandates and vaccine mandates. So it was sort of about the pandemic, but then it went into LGBTQ issues and, critical race theory and that, that just disrupt the meetings about trying to actually help our kids get back to school and, and teach them in a pandemic. And they just were hardly able to hold the meetings. So it is around the country, definitely orchestrated.
Yep. So Jerry, can you say more? How did you learn about the FBI looking into this?
Linda Cavazos is the school board trustee here in Clark County in Nevada. And she came and we had a meeting the other night on our Nevada Now meeting on local offices, being important to elect, and she was on. And, she was talking about what they're doing for her for not just security. She had to hire the school board security wasn't implementing what she asked them to do. I sat right in front of some people who, they weren't wearing masks and no one was making them. And so she had to hire her own security for these school board meetings for her safety, for our safety. But you're hearing that, my husband was like, well, that's just horrible. It's happening in Las Vegas. Well, this is happening everywhere in every single city and town. So it's orchestrated, and the FBI has been looking into it. Our attorney general is looking into it as well. Finally, I think that kind of freed him up to be able to do that. So
that's super helpful. Thank you for sharing that, Jerry.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
This is Linda Morse, and I'm a high school history teacher. So of course, critical race theory and, the whole thing, but I'm also at a charter school, and I have the great fortune to be able to teach a year-long class on African history. And I also teach anthropology, and that's my undergrad. So that's my love. But honest and true, I feel like every student should be taking an anthropology class or, some kind of significant culture exploration to, learn about why we all look different and the how there were so many different ways that people are married or people get up and live their lives, and to just experience that a lot more. And I think at school, especially with the pushback against any kind of intellectual thought, frankly, about race or historical events surrounding it, I feel like, we're totally going in such a completely intolerant direction. And, I know this is like kind of off the topic, but I just feel like if we would start having everybody be taking anthropology or a lot of culture, then people would be a little calmed down, frankly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work to do. I mean, I think that it's very frustrating. I mean, like you, I work in this space too. I've built a civic education provider, and we've got curriculum in a dozen districts in Massachusetts and provide professional development support for educators all over the Commonwealth. And, we too have been getting chewed up in these ridiculous battles. And so it's frustrating because one can see what kids need, right? You can see the ways in which we could help them learn to have very healthy relationships with themselves, their own sense of self and identity, and with people around them. And even ways of doing that that's completely compatible with keeping an open mind about diverse political points of view and things like that. So the question of how and what to teach is not hard to reach at all. And yet we have this really challenging situation where subsets of folks are just kind of connected to a really toxic and problematic misinformation ecosystem. And so that's the thing I kind of beat my head against a little bit. One of the things I'm also trying to figure out how we can work on is how to rebuild an ecosystem of healthy local journalism. The idea being that if people had access to kind of clean information and resources locally connected, we might be able to wean them off of some of this other stuff and kind of crack through that, what feels like a kind of impenetrable alternative universe. So we have a democracy agenda on my campaign, and one of its elements is to focus on this question of how we can rebuild a healthy ecosystem of local journalism. I know that sounds kind of abstract and kind of far removed from the problem, but there's just sort of the sense that it's very hard to crack into networks of people who are really kind of oriented towards sources of information that are just so, QAnon, right? That's sort of what we're talking about.
Mhm.
So.
Hi, I'm Carla. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for running. I really appreciate it. A couple years ago, I ran for West Hollywood City Council, and
awesome.
I totally it's such an amazing experience running, and so thank you. So I actually moved from California. I was living in Rochester, New York for 2 years, but moved from California, and I'm seeing very similar things in regards to what everyone's calling mass and caste. I hope I'm pronouncing caste right. Like, I just moved here. I'm pronouncing everything wrong. I'm learning. But I'm really actually frustrated by the way I'm seeing like our local politicians handling the situation, because I don't feel like there's a real grasp on mental health issues, addiction. And I also think there's racial undertones that are being presented as well in regards to this idea of, I was just reading an article about how they were going to go do arrests. To me, that kind of sounds like they're just going to round up people, right? And put them away. And so, and I also find too, is Boston's a very predominantly white city. And so if you look at like what's really going on there and what is the root cause of like actually what's happening, and that it's not just, like, I've also heard too, moving here, that Cape Cod also has drug issues, that are going on and everything like that. So I'm just curious a little bit here, like what are your thoughts? What do you believe is really the systemic issue or maybe the root cause of what's going on? And how can we really move forward? Because like I said, I'm coming from California where we had Skid Row, we had up north, San Francisco. And I don't feel that the problem—
San Francisco. Anyway, I'm sorry, that was just funny.
It's a
San
thing.
Francisco. Okay.
Yeah. And so, the politicians there are progressive and everything, but at the same time, it's a big issue. So just curious about your thoughts and how you look at dealing with it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. When I'm sort of fully on the campaign trail, what I say is it's time for us to reimagine ourselves as one Commonwealth and to knit our diverse communities together across the state by building public commitment for hard work and investment in those basic building blocks I was talking about: housing and transportation, schools, good jobs, and justice. But I start there by saying we have to reimagine ourselves as one Commonwealth, because that's the core problem. And at mass and caste, I mean, you're right. I mean, that is a one Commonwealth issue and challenge. We do not have sufficient mental health resources, behavioral health resources in our whole health system. So this is one of those places where we kind of live with a myth in Massachusetts. We always pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, we laid the foundation for universal access to high quality healthcare. We have the most people covered of any state. But the truth is there's huge holes in our healthcare system. And the biggest hole is mental and behavioral health. And we just don't have counselors available. In Western and Central Mass, we do not have beds for substance use disorder treatment. And as you said, the Cape also has challenges with access to health resources. So who is at mass and caste? People from all over the whole Commonwealth, okay? It really is, and it is multiracial. It's a multiracial encampment, all right? So that is also true about mass and caste. And so the real important thing is that we connect the dots. We have a challenge in a specific neighborhood in Boston, because across the whole Commonwealth, we have a split screen economy. We have real prosperity in the booming Boston area, and then withering economies on the Cape, in Central and Western Mass, and large parts of it. People don't have access to opportunity and security. They can't put together the pieces of a job with a strong wage and a housing opportunity. And then you add into the mix of that, real health deserts in Western Mass, and lack of access to mental health resources on the Cape. And you get an opioid epidemic that has continued unabated for the entirety of this governor's administration. 5 people dying of overdoses every single day for the entire time he's been in office, with no improvements, okay? Mass and caste is not a Boston problem, it is a one Commonwealth problem. And if we can see ourselves as one Commonwealth, then we can actually start to fix our challenges, lift people up, invest in the infrastructure that people need in order to have that foundation underneath them for health and healthy communities. So Matt, you got me going. That's my full take on where we find ourselves. So yeah. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, yeah, Bria.
Oh yeah, no, I was Danielle, because you let us call you Danielle. Danielle, you are amazing. And thank you